7 executives stood and watched. Only one janitor rushed in to save the billionaire woman who had stopped breathing. But the price he paid was losing everything. That morning, the top floor of Ashcroft Holdings Tower gleamed like a star made of glass, where the most powerful people in the city were preparing to finalize an ambitious business quarter. Alexandra Ashcroft, the billionaire woman respected across Wall Street, stood at the head of the table, her voice sharp as steel, each number she presented landing with the weight of metal plates. But in a single moment, that untouchable facade began to crack. Midway through her speech, Alexandra froze. A blink, a missing breath. Then her hand trembled as it rose to her chest as if she were trying to hold on to something slipping away. No one reacted in time. The expensive suits stiffened for a few seconds, seconds that felt like a lifetime. Someone even let out a dry chuckle, thinking she was joking. Another whispered, "Is she acting?" But no one stepped forward. Not a single person. Then Alexandra collapsed onto the marble floor, with such force that the impact echoed like a period at the end of a sentence. Her lips turned purple. Her chest no longer rose. The luxurious meeting room instantly became a cold chamber where people only stared at each other, waiting for someone to do what none of them had the courage to. That was when the back door burst open. And the first person to rush in wasn't an executive, her private doctor, or a bodyguard. It was a janitor, still holding a dripping mop. The door slammed against the wall with a sharp, dry sound, causing the entire meeting room to turn around. The man standing there was neither a paramedic nor a hero, and certainly not someone of equal status. It was Bernard Kellerman, the morning shift janitor, his gray uniform faded from hundreds of washes. He froze for less than a second when he saw Alexandra lying motionless at the very center of power. But that 1 second was enough to decide the rest of his life. Then Bernard hurled the mop aside, the clatter of metal striking the stone floor startling someone nearby. He rushed forward. Immediately, expensive arms shot out to block him. "What are you doing here? Get out of the meeting room now. This is an executive area." Bernard kept walking, fast, determined, as if he didn't hear them, or as if a human life mattered more than all the invisible rules polished into this room. One director stepped forward, blocking Alexandra's way. "You are not allowed to touch her," Bernard answered without hesitation, his voice shaky but filled with resolve. "I know CPR. If we don't do something right now, she'll die." The crowded room suddenly felt as if all the air had been sucked out. No one believed. No one was sure. No one dared. Only Bernard knelt and placed his fingers on Alexandra's neck. No pulse. No breath. And he understood in that very moment that he was the only one standing between life and death for the most powerful woman in the building. Bernard whispered, almost to himself, "Don't give up. Don't leave like this." Then he began to act. Bernard knelt beside Alexandra, his hands trembling from tension yet somehow frighteningly precise. He tilted her head, opened her airway, exactly as he had learned in a free CPR class at the community center, a class he had joined only to earn food vouchers. No one ever imagined that skill would save the life of a billionaire woman. He inhaled deeply, leaned down, and breathed his own air into her lungs. Instantly, the entire meeting room exploded. "What is he doing? Oh my God, he's kissing her. Stop! Stop right now!" Something, maybe an umbrella, maybe a security baton, slammed hard into Bernard's back. He doubled over in pain, sucking in a sharp breath, but he didn't stop. He continued chest compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sweat dripped from his forehead onto the polished stone floor. His back burned. Curses erupted from every direction. But Bernard couldn't hear any of it anymore. In his mind, there was only one sentence from his CPR instructor years ago. If they aren't breathing, you are their final pair of lungs. A second strike hit his shoulder, sending his whole body swaying, but he gritted his teeth, forcing himself to maintain the rhythm that mattered more than anything in that moment. Don't die. Please don't die. He spoke through ragged breaths, like a prayer. 26, 27, 28. Then suddenly, Alexandra's chest jerked violently. A breath shot out. She coughed hard, like someone being hauled up from the bottom of the ocean. Air rushed back into her body. Bernard froze, his entire body trembling, his hands numb, his shoulders aching to the point of paralysis. But he smiled. Small, exhausted, yet it was the smile of a man who had just pulled life out of death's hands. As for the people around them, they flooded toward Alexandra, not to thank Bernard, not to ask if he was okay, but to shove him aside as if he had done something wrong. The meeting room doors burst open, security rushing in. CFO Tyler Brigham, his face cold as steel, pointed straight at Bernard, his voice dripping with disgust. You just put your mouth on my CEO? Who do you think you are? Bernard opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Everything he had done, saving a life, had been twisted into a wrongdoing, and prejudice fanned that lie faster than truth ever could. While Alexandra was still gasping for air, eyes shut tight from pain, Bernard stood silently in the middle of the meeting room like a shadow, small, misplaced, and unwanted. CFO Tyler stepped closer, too close. The contempt in his eyes was enough to suffocate the entire room. Your name? Bernard swallowed hard, trying to stand straight even though his back still burned from the blows. Bernard Kellerman. Tyler cut him off, his voice icy. You placed your hands and your mouth on my CEO. That is unacceptable behavior. Bernard's eyes widened. He shook his head repeatedly. She wasn't breathing. I had to get out of the meeting room. Now. No, thank you. No grateful glance. Not a single person stepped up to say, he just saved her life. The high-end suits, the same people who moments ago were too terrified to act, now pushed past each other, just to avoid walking near him. Bernard bent down, picking up the mop bucket that had rolled across the floor. His hands shook so badly that the water inside rippled like a wind-stirred lake. He didn't dare look back at Alexandra, even though every part of him wanted to know if she was okay. But every gaze in that room spoke the same message. You don't belong here. When the meeting room door closed behind him, the dry clack sounded like a verdict. Bernard stood alone in the empty hallway, feeling the entire skyscraper push him backwards, step by step, as if trying to erase his existence on the spot. He bowed his head, wrapped his arms around the mop handle, and walked. Each step felt as heavy as carrying the world's injustice on his shoulders. And Bernard had no idea. That very moment was the first crack, leading to the storm that would drag his entire life into darkness. That night, the city slid past behind Bernard like a tired strip of lights. The old bus rattled with every pothole, sending sharp jolts up his already aching back each time the wheels bounced. On the window, his reflection appeared faint and blurry, a man with sunken eyes, wrinkled shoulders, and a face that looked as if it had just walked out of a nameless storm. But the storm had a name. Its name was injustice. Bernard leaned back in his seat, trying to steady his breathing, not because he was tired, but because if he let himself breathe too hard, his tears might fall right there on the bus, in front of strangers who had no idea what battle he had just endured. He closed his eyes, trying to erase the image of Alexandra collapsing onto the cold marble, her lips turning purple. Trying to forget the voice screaming accusations at him. Trying to forget Tyler's contemptuous stare as he ordered Bernard out of the room. But those memories clung to him like a spreading ink stain. The more he tried to wipe it away, the larger it grew. The bus stopped at the rundown neighborhood on the city's west side. Bernard stepped off, the night wind slipping through his shirt and making him shiver. The old buildings stood silent, the streetlights casting long shadows across peeling walls, but at least no one here called him filthy. He climbed the rickety wooden stairs leading to his apartment, trying to walk upright, even though each step sent a stab through his body. When he opened the door, a tiny voice burst out immediately. "Daddy!" Molly ran to him, her hair a tangled mess, her small bare feet moving over the cold tile floor. She wrapped her arms around him, right over the sorest spot. Bernard flinched slightly but still bent down, pulling her into an embrace as if holding his entire world. "You came home late. I thought you weren't coming back." Her voice trembled, as if afraid of her own words. Bernard smiled, a smile barely masking the exhaustion. "I was just a little busy, sweetheart. Daddy's okay." But those words cracked the moment they left his lips. Poor fathers often had to lie in such situations, not to deceive their children, but to protect the tiny bit of peace belonging to a child who had nothing but a kind heart. Molly looked up at him, studying his face carefully. "Daddy's sad? Did someone make you sad?" Bernard stiffened slightly. The child shouldn't be that perceptive. But Molly was different. She had grown up just enough to understand the weight on her father's face. He patted her head. "It's okay, Angel. I did something good today. That's enough." Dinner was simple and already waiting, reheated macaroni and cheese along with some cold stir-fried vegetables. Janet, the kind neighbor who watched Molly whenever he worked, was washing the pot. She glanced at him with worry. "You don't look well at all. What happened, Bernard?" He just smiled and shook his head. Poor people learn to smile instead of complain, because complaining doesn't fix anything, and sometimes speaking it aloud only makes the pain more real. Bernard tried to swallow a few bites, but the smell of the food suddenly became unbearable. His stomach tightened, not from hunger, but from the humiliation still lingering inside him. He lowered his head, hiding his reddening eyes behind his lashes, listening to Molly chatter about school. Each giggle pulled him a little further away from that meeting room, away from the shout of, "Get out of here!" But only a little. The wound was too deep for a single dinner to heal. When Molly went to bed and Janet left, the apartment grew silent. Only the old heater hummed, a weak, uneven sound, like the breathing of an injured animal. Bernard sat on the edge of the bed. He winced as he turned. His back throbbed with harsh, pulsing pain. He lifted his shirt, checking under the dim yellow light. Red marks stretched from his shoulder down to his back, traces of the senseless blows he'd taken while saving a life. He placed his hand over the bruises. Hot, stinging, aching. But what burned more was the memory of their contemptuous eyes. Bernard leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. Everything came rushing back. Alexandra not breathing. Her heartbeat is fading. His own breath enters her lungs. The shouts, the accusations, the way they drove him out like an animal. He opened his eyes and stared up at the old ceiling. A question formed, silent yet echoing painfully inside him. Why does doing the right thing cost everything? No one answered. The night remained silent. But some silent nights are crueler than any scream. The next morning, before sunlight had even risen over the polished skyscrapers, Bernard was already standing in front of the main entrance of Ashcroft Holdings, gripping the lunchbox Molly had made for him as if it were the last bit of warmth left in the world. He stood straight, trying to look calm, even though he hadn't slept a minute the night before. He told himself everything was just a misunderstanding, that today, when they were calmer, when they checked the cameras, when they remembered Alexandra had nearly stopped breathing in his hands, they would understand. But the moment he stepped toward the revolving door, a massive arm blocked him across the chest, cold and firm like a steel gate slamming shut. "You're not allowed in." Bernard froze for a few seconds, thinking he had misheard. "I work here. Night shift, floor 22. But the security guard didn't even look at him. "Orders from above. You're banned from the building." The words dropped into Bernard's stomach like a block of ice. I didn't do anything wrong. Please, let me speak to HR or someone." The guard looked down at the ground, avoiding his eyes. "They said you need to leave. Now." Bernard felt the world around him blur, spreading across his vision like fog on a glass pane. Employees in pristine suits drifted past him, and not one looked at him like a human being. They glanced at him from the corners of their eyes, then immediately turned away, as though his presence might dirty their expensive clothing. Bernard tried circling to the side entrance, clinging to the fragile hope that this was all a mistake. But before he could touch the handle, the night shift supervisor was already standing there holding a white envelope. "Bernard Kellerman, this is for you." A termination letter. Short, cold. So brutally curt it was almost cruel. "Conduct inappropriate for interaction with senior personnel. Effective immediately." Bernard read it again and again, his eyes widening as though watching a slow-motion crash happening inside his chest. Inappropriate conduct. That was the phrase they used to describe him trying to save a woman who was seconds away from death right in front of them. He looked at the supervisor, his voice cracking. "I saved her. She wasn't breathing. I had to." The supervisor sighed, avoiding his eyes as if meeting Bernard's gaze would make him guilty too. "I believe you. But orders are orders. I can't help." A sentence as light as mist, yet heavier than chains dragging him to the bottom. Bernard walked away, staggering like a man struck at the temple. He no longer felt the sound of traffic nor the voices around him, only the chaotic pounding of his heart, bashing against his ribs as if trying to escape. Then his phone buzzed. A message appeared. "Bro, what the hell did you do to the CEO? People are talking everywhere." Bernard's hands trembled. Another message came like a gunshot. "You seen the clip yet? Man, did you seriously kiss her?" Bernard opened the video, a blurry frame from a security camera, him leaning over Alexandra for rescue breaths. But the viewers couldn't see her purple lips. They couldn't see her unmoving chest. They didn't understand CPR. They didn't care about context. They saw one distorted angle and shaped it into the cruelest meaning possible. Hundreds of comments swarmed in like starving crows. "Gross! Stay away, you creep! Know your place! How dare he touch the CEO!" A tabloid site ran a headline. "Janitor assaults female CEO with unwanted kiss during meeting." Bernard stood frozen on the street, his feet rooted to the cracked sidewalk. He whispered, his voice splintering into 100 pieces. "No, that's not what happened. I was saving her." But the words vanished into the wind, like ash blown into the cold morning air. An older man sitting nearby glanced at him, not knowing anything, yet still watching Bernard with wary eyes, as one might look at someone who'd done something shameful. No one knew he had saved a life. No one knew he'd been struck. No one knew he'd begged a dying woman to stay alive. But everyone believed a blurry photo. A story crafted by people who never once looked him in the eye. Rumors travel faster than light. But the worst part isn't the rumor. The worst part is when the whole world believes it. Bernard sank onto a public bench, burying his face in his hands. Molly's lunchbox slipped from his grip, hitting the ground, the lid popping open, tiny sandwiches scattering across the pavement. He didn't pick them up. He couldn't. In this vast, crowded city, Bernard realized he had become invisible. No, worse than invisible. He had become something to ridicule, to blame, to smear. A man who had fought to keep one life tethered to the world. Now he had to fight to keep his own from disappearing. That night, the city of Philadelphia curled beneath a thin layer of mist, a cold mist, like the hand of an invisible judge. Inside his small apartment, Bernard could not sleep. He lay there, eyes wide open in the dark, his back aching from the blows he'd taken that morning. But the physical pain was nothing compared to what was crushing his chest. The silence of the entire world. Molly slept soundly on the bed beside him, her tiny breaths steady, the last comforting sound in a day that had stripped him of everything. Bernard looked at her, his heart tightening. He wanted to cry, but forced himself not to. A single father doesn't get to cry, especially when his daughter is sleeping beside him. He tried to close his eyes, but every time his eyelids dipped, the memory of the meeting room surged up like a living nightmare. Alexandra collapsing, her lips turning purple, the shouting, the blows to his back, the insults, the disgusted stares, the termination letter, and that blurry image that had turned him into a monster. A faint beep, beep, pulled him out of his thoughts. His phone lit up in the darkness, a tiny flashlight shining into the night. Unknown caller. In that moment, his heart skipped a beat. No one called him at this hour, unless it was something bad. He swallowed hard, picked up, and spoke softly so as not to wake Molly. "Hello? This is me." A woman's voice came through, cold and sharp enough to make Bernard shiver. "Mr. Bernard Kellerman, this is HR from Ashcroft Holdings. I'm calling regarding the results of the internal review." Bernard shot upright, his heart pounding so loudly he could hear it in the dark. He hoped, just a little, that they had reviewed the footage, that someone defended him, that the truth had finally been acknowledged. Just a tiny hope. "Yes, this is Bernard. I would like to explain," but the woman cut him off, emotionless, impatient, without a trace of belief in him. "After reviewing the incident, we have determined that your behavior was inappropriate for interactions with senior personnel." It felt like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water straight into Bernard's heart. Inappropriate. I saved the CEO. She wasn't breathing. I had to perform CPR. His voice cracked in desperation, but HR responded with the kind of sentence influential people use to slam shut every door. "The decision is final. The company will not pursue legal action, but you are permanently banned from all Ashcroft Holdings premises. Your final paycheck will be mailed." No opportunity to explain. No follow-up questions. No, "Please tell us what happened." Only a verdict, delivered as though he had been guilty long before the phone ever rang. "You've got to be joking," Bernard breathed, his voice breaking. "I performed CPR. It was the only way to save her. If I didn't do it, she would have died." There was silence on the other end, but it wasn't. Understanding silence. It was the silence of people who were sure they were right. "You should be aware," HR said slowly, her voice even colder than before. "Some members of the leadership team found your image offensive. And to protect the company's reputation, this is the appropriate course of action." Offensive. Reputation. Two words are powerful enough to crush the life of a poor man without needing any evidence. Bernard buried his face in his hands. The world around him shrank into a single, dark point. "She's alive. Because of me," Bernard whispered through a broken voice, unsure if he was speaking to HR or to the darkness. HR ended the call with robotic indifference. "Mr. Kellerman, we request that you refrain from contacting any Ashcroft employees. We wish you the best." Beep, beep, beep. The call ended, but her words hung in the room like a death sentence for his dignity. Bernard set the phone on the bed, his hands trembling uncontrollably. He looked at Molly sleeping, her tiny face calm in the dim light. He bit his lip until it bled, desperate not to make a sound that might wake her. Tears slipped down his cheeks, hot but flavored with the bitterness of helplessness. He turned away and pressed his back against the wall, even though the bruises made him flinch in pain. He didn't dare make a sound, afraid it would wake his daughter. "Sweetheart," he whispered into the dark, his voice shattering like glass. "How are we going to live if Daddy doesn't have a job?" The night breeze slipped through the cracked window, making the curtain flutter faintly, as if even the room itself was sighing with him. Bernard closed his eyes, and more tears slid down his temples. "Why?" he choked silently. "Why does saving someone make me lose everything?" No one answered. Outside, the city glowed with glass towers, places people like Bernard would never be allowed to enter. They slept comfortably in warmth, but Bernard lay there in the dark with a sentence he never committed. And he didn't know that somewhere else in the city, the woman he had saved, the only person who could break that sentence, was awake as well, unsettled by the trembling voice that had pulled her back from the brink of death. Morning on the 30th floor of the glossy skyscraper was usually the beginning of a powerful day. Sunlight spilt gold across the floors, the scent of expensive dark roast coffee drifted in the air, and the rapid clacking of assistants' keyboards raced against deadlines. But this morning, Alexandra Ashcroft saw nothing but the smeared gray of a nightmare that kept repeating itself. She jolted upright in bed, breathing in ragged bursts like someone yanked violently up from underwater. Cold sweat soaked her collar. Her hand trembled as she pressed it to her chest, where her heart still beat, heavy, uneven, like it was trying to remember how to work after almost stopping. This was the fourth night. The fourth night in a row she had snapped awake from the same dream. A black void, like the bottom of an ocean, pulling her down with invisible whirlpools. She tried to fight, tried to breathe, but the more she tried, the more water flooded into her lungs. She couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't call for help. Empty, silent, cold as death. And then, from inside that darkness, a voice appeared. Not clear, not elegant, not authoritative. A voice hoarse, broken, desperate, as if it was straining every breath to keep her tethered to life. "Breathe. Please, don't give up." That voice hauled her out of the abyss in the final second. But every time she tried to remember the face behind it, the image vanished like smoke. Alexandra sat at the edge of the bed, covering her face with both hands. She was the CEO of a billion-dollar corporation, a woman Wall Street respected, someone who had never feared anything except failure. Yet last night, She had feared death in the truest sense. And even more terrifying was the feeling that someone had dragged her back from death. But she didn't know who. She didn't remember anything except that voice. She stood and walked into the kitchen. The coffee machine had already started at 6:45 a.m., precisely as it had for years. Everything perfect, on time, predictable. But this morning, the expensive coffee tasted like water. She opened her laptop, scrolling through emails, financial reports, press briefing requests, but what she was looking for wasn't there. No one mentioned the CEO going into cardiac arrest in the middle of a meeting. No one asked if she was okay. No one mentioned the person who saved her. Strangest of all, when she asked her staff yesterday, everyone gave the same vague responses, as if reading from a script. The matter has been handled internally. There's no need for you to worry. We followed protocol. Protocol? Did they really think her life was a protocol? Alexandra frowned, a chill running down her spine. She opened the company's internal site. No announcements, no investigation, no report. No mention of CPR, no mention of any employee involved. As if her near-death experience had been erased with a single click. Suddenly, memories bled back like ink on paper. The ache in her chest, the sound of a chair falling, someone shouting, and then darkness swallowed her whole. She narrowed her eyes. A blurry image surfaced, a pair of hands on her chest, warm but trembling, a breath pressed against her lips, strained, urgent. The frantic voice counting, each number costing a breath. Not an executive, not her private doctor, not a bodyguard. It was... No. Alexandra jolted, setting her coffee cup down hard on the marble counter. She dialed the head of security. "Marcus, I want to see the full camera footage of the meeting room from the morning of the incident." There was hesitation on the other end. "Ma'am, legal is holding the original copy." "I didn't ask where it is," Alexandra replied slowly, each word solid as steel. "I asked, when will it be in my inbox?" Marcus swallowed. 20 minutes. When the video arrived, Alexandra opened it without blinking, and in an instant, her entire world collapsed. She saw herself presenting, then collapsing onto the white marble like a puppet with its strings cut. She saw the executives panicking, but no one stepping forward. She saw the door burst open. A janitor rushes in. A flicker of shock crossed his face when he saw her lying still. Then, without hesitation, he dropped to his knees beside her. She watched him tilt her head, check her pulse, and begin chest compressions. She watched him get shoved, pulled, hit, yelled at like an animal. Yet he kept coming back, counting, pushing, breathing into her lungs as though his breath was the last thread tying her to life. She saw his eyes, terrified, desperate, but determined. She saw his trembling hands, his back taking blows that made him flinch, yet he never stopped. She saw the exact moment her chest jerked as she gasped for air. He saved her. He fought an entire room to keep her alive. And then the final image. CFO Tyler grabbing him by the collar and shoving him out of frame like a stray dog. Alexandra's hands fell to her sides. Her breath hitched in her throat. Not because her heart had once stopped, but because her heart now hurt for a different reason. She had allowed the man who saved her life to be treated like garbage. She stood frozen, her breath trembling. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He's the one who brought me back." And for the first time in years, Alexandra Ashcroft, a woman who had never bowed to the market, felt shame when she saw her own reflection in the screen. She touched her lips, the place where Bernard had breathed life back into her, and her eyes filled. "Who is he?" She called Marcus again, and her voice was no longer that of a CEO, but of a human being who realized she owed someone her life. "The man in the video." "What is his name?" Marcus answered quietly. "Bernard Kellerman." The name dropped into Alexandra's mind like a heavy stone. Each syllable tightened her chest. "Bernard was terminated," Marcus added, making her freeze. "There were allegations of inappropriate conduct." Alexandra closed her eyes, and when she opened them, the shock was gone. In its place was fury. Cold, sharp, dangerous. "Marcus." "Yes, ma'am." "Find him. His file, his address, everything." Alexandra's voice lowered, slicing through the silence like a blade. "I want to meet the man who saved my life before it's too late." When the afternoon cast long shadows over the rundown buildings of West Oak Lane, the poor neighborhood seemed swallowed by the blue-gray winter sky. Wind shrieked through crooked doorframes, carrying the smell of rust and damp earth that had settled for years. Children ran barefoot across cracked concrete, their laughter ringing brightly through the poverty, making the place both heartbreaking and strangely alive. Alexandra Ashcroft's black Mercedes moved slowly, almost as if the car itself felt embarrassed entering this neighborhood, a place where its value could feed a family for an entire year. She sat behind the wheel, her hand gripping so tight the knuckles were white. With every turn into a narrower alley, her heartbeat thumped harder. Not from fear, from urgency. Every word in Marcus's report still pierced her mind like needles. Hasn't gone to work for 3 days. Neighbors say he isn't eating, not opening the door, not responding when knocked, maybe collapsing emotionally. She bit her lip. For the first time in her life, guilt wasn't an abstract discomfort. It was a real, sharp pain under her ribs. A man had used his own breath to restore her life, and she had left him to die slowly in the dark. She parked in front of a dilapidated 4-story building, its peeling paint like sunburned skin, the rusty steel stairs grinding against each other whenever the wind blew. The bitter cold slapped her face the moment she stepped out. Her designer shoes touched the dirty concrete, a contrast so stark that a few people stared from afar in disbelief. A woman like her? Here? Alexandra looked up the stairwell. A door labeled 3B opened slightly. A small girl appeared, clutching a worn, stuffed bear. Her eyes widened in astonishment. Alexandra stepped forward and gently crouched. "Sweetie, do you know which apartment Bernard Kellerman is in?" The little girl held her breath, then nodded. "That's my daddy." Alexandra's heart twisted sharply, as if someone had wrung it with both hands. "Molly?" she asked, afraid she was right. The girl nodded. "Yes." Alexandra inhaled deeply before asking, "Is your daddy home?" Molly's big round eyes flickered with fear, the kind of fear familiar to children who grow up around illness, overdue bills, and adults collapsing silently under life's weight. "Yes, he is, but Daddy won't wake up. I call him, but Daddy won't open his eyes. I made soup. I shook him. I don't know what to do anymore." Her voice cracked at the final words. A freezing chill sliced down Alexandra's spine, not from the weather, from the horrifying realization. If she had come 1 day later, the man who saved her might have died from the very system she stood at the top of. She didn't hesitate another second. "Let me in, Molly." The girl stepped aside, her tiny feet retreating into the dark. The apartment, barely 500 square feet, unfolded before me. Alexandra, smelling of dampness and the desperate sharpness of poverty. Thin blankets, stained walls, an old heater wheezing uneven breaths, every corner etched with the marks of struggle, like a diary written without ink. And then she saw him. Bernard lay curled on a thin mattress, wrapped tightly in an old blanket as if trying to hide from the pain he no longer had the strength to fight. His lips were cracked. His breaths were so faint she had to stand close to see them. His face was hollow, pale, and exhausted to the point of surrender. He was no longer the man in the video who fought with every ounce of strength to keep her heart beating. He looked like someone the world had drained dry, of blood, of breath, of hope. "Bernard," Alexandra whispered, kneeling beside him. Molly stood behind her, biting her lip, eyes brimming with tears.
"Miss, Daddy hasn't eaten in 3 days. Daddy said, Daddy is too tired. I'm scared."
The little girl's broken voice made Alexandra turn away to hide her tears. She placed her trembling hand over Bernard's. His skin was burning. Not the warmth of a healthy body, the scorching heat of a fever.
"Bernard, can you hear me?"
Alexandra shook his hand gently. He didn't respond. A wave of fear slammed into her so hard she couldn't breathe. She shook him harder.
"Bernard, can you hear me? You have to wake up.
Her throat locked. For the first time in her life, the iron-willed woman who led a giant corporation felt small, weak, and powerless, like a child.
"Molly,"
Alexandra turned.
"Sweetheart, bring me your phone, quickly."
Molly ran, almost slipping in her panic. Alexandra grabbed the phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands.
"Hello? There's a man, high fever, unresponsive, possibly severe dehydration. Send an ambulance to the address."
Her voice broke. A CEO, someone who never allowed her voice to crack in front of anyone. But today, in this moment, no one in the world mattered more than the man gasping for life in front of her. She held Bernard's hand tightly. "You pulled me back from death," she whispered, voice trembling. "Now it's my turn to pull you back. Do you hear me, Bernard? You are not dying. Not like this. Not alone. Not in the dark." The distant wail of an ambulance siren cut through the air, growing louder and clearer until it echoed right beneath the building. Alexandra placed her hand on Bernard's chest, feeling the faint rise and fall. She whispered, like taking an oath, "I won't let them bury you. Not while I'm still breathing." The ambulance sirens echoed through the narrow streets of West Oak Lane like a scream tearing through the gray afternoon. As two paramedics rushed up the rusted staircase, Alexandra had to grip the railing just to keep her hands from shaking. No one in the neighborhood ever expected to see Alexandra Ashcroft, the most powerful CEO in the city, standing in the middle of these decaying buildings, holding the hand of a janitor's daughter, her eyes red with fear. The door to 3B burst open as the medical team entered. They brushed past Alexandra and Molly to reach Bernard, who lay motionless on the thin mattress. One paramedic knelt, placing 2 fingers on Bernard's neck. "No response. Shallow breathing, high temperature." "Could be shock from dehydration and exhaustion," the second said, quickly clipping an oxygen sensor onto Bernard's finger. Alexandra stood pressed against the wall, her hand over her mouth. The room was so small that only a few steps separated her from the man lying there. But the truth was a vast chasm of class and power stood between them. And now, she felt it pierce her chest to realize she had once stood firmly on the other side of that chasm. She heard the paramedic speak, his words slicing the air like blades. If we'd arrived any later, he might have stopped breathing. Alexandra's shoulders collapsed as if struck from above. "Why?
Why was he alone like this?
The paramedic glanced around the room, the cracked walls, the unfinished pot of soup on the stove, Molly's worn stuffed bear squeezed nearly flat. I'm guessing he's been under too much stress. People who get pushed to a breaking point collapse fast. The sentence didn't need emphasis. It hit Alexandra hard enough to steal her breath. They lifted Bernard onto the stretcher. His body was so light that one paramedic paused, then looked at Alexandra. Has he eaten anything these past few days? Molly heard that, and her tiny hands clutched Alexandra's wrist.
I made soup for Daddy, but Daddy said he was tired. Daddy couldn't eat.
Her trembling voice made Alexandra kneel and pull the girl into her arms.
Sweetie, you did everything you could. He didn't stop eating because of you.
She smoothed Molly's tangled hair, and for the first time in her life, such a simple gesture twisted her heart with a fierce protectiveness. As they carried Bernard outside, Alexandra walked beside the stretcher, terrified that if she blinked he might disappear. Neighbors peeked out from door frames, watching with astonishment, concern, and curiosity. An older man standing near the broken elevator asked, "Is he okay? I heard he lost his job and people were talking bad about him." Alexandra shook her head softly, her voice tight like rainwater trapped in her throat.
He didn't deserve any of that.
When the stretcher reached the ambulance, Alexandra stepped forward, but a paramedic blocked her. "One person with the patient only." Molly immediately grabbed her hand, eyes pleading with a desperation too big for such a small face.
Can you go with Daddy? I'm scared to ride in this car."
Alexandra knelt to look at her, her heart melting. A voice called from behind. "Let her go. I'll follow in my car." It was Janet, the neighbor, arriving breathless. Alexandra nodded, lifted Molly, and stepped into the ambulance, sitting beside Bernard. The doors shut. The siren wailed. The vehicle lunged forward. Inside the cramped ambulance, the cold, white light fell across Bernard's pale face. Alexandra looked at him, the man who had pressed his mouth to hers, breath by desperate breath, pulling her back from the razor edge between life and death. Now he lay here, right on that razor edge himself. A paramedic adjusted the IV line, then glanced over. "You know him?" The question squeezed her heart. She looked at Bernard, the man whose trembling hands had kept her alive, and answered in a voice so soft the paramedic had probably never heard anything like it in his career.
He's the man who saved my life.
A long silence filled the ambulance before the paramedic replied in a gentle tone.
Then today, it's your turn to save his.
Alexandra lowered her head and took Bernard's hand. His hand was cold, weak, as if it might slip away from hers at any moment. She leaned close to him, whispering, not as a CEO giving commands, but as a human, speaking to the one who had pulled her out of death.
Bernard, can you hear me? You pulled me back. Now, I'm going to pull you back. You're not giving up. Not now. Not like this.
She paused, her chest tightening around words she had never spoken to anyone.
You don't know how much of my life I owe to yours.
The ambulance swerved into Northside Medical's emergency bay. Red lights swept over Alexandra's face, sharp, determined, unyielding. The back doors swung open and doctors waited, but before they wheeled Bernard away, Alexandra whispered one last time. I won't let anyone smear your name ever again. I promise. Northside Medical was always bright at night, the white lights flooding the emergency lobby, making the entire space feel like a spaceship waiting for lives drifting between death and survival to land. When the ambulance stopped, its doors swung open and the rapid footsteps of the medical team filled the air. In that moment, the whole world seemed to shrink to the pale, swaying face of Bernard lying on the stretcher, his eyes closed, eyelids trembling like someone trapped inside a nightmare with no way out. Alexandra stepped out behind them, holding Molly tight against her chest as if shielding the girl from every cruelty in the outside world. Her expensive high heels tapped against the hospital tiles, but they no longer echoed with their usual confidence. Now each step carried only one weight. If she had arrived a few hours later, Bernard would have belonged to death. The doctors rushed Bernard into the ER. The doors slammed shut in Alexandra's face, separating her with an invisible wall, the same wall between the power she once commanded with ease and the fragile life she could no longer control. Molly clung to her, eyes wide and frightened.
Miss, is Daddy going to die?
The question fell into the air like a tiny needle, tiny, but sharp enough to crack Alexandra's heart. She knelt, cupping the little girl's face in her cold hands.
No, sweetie. Your dad is very strong. He won't leave you.
But as she said it, her throat tightened, and she knew. She was saying the very words she needed to hear. A senior doctor stepped out from behind the ER doors, pulling down his mask. His face was calm, but he couldn't hide the gravity of the situation. He's severely exhausted, high fever, dehydration. His immune system is compromised, and there are signs of prolonged psychological stress. Alexandra tightened her grip.
Is he going to be okay?
The doctor studied her for a few seconds, trying to decipher the relationship between this polished CEO and a poor janitor lying inside. After a moment, he replied, "We're stabilizing him. But what knocked him down isn't just illness." A silence dropped between them, heavy as stone. Alexandra looked down. She understood. It hurt to understand. It was the blows of the system she was part of, the prejudice, the disdain, the coldness of leadership that had pushed Bernard to the edge. The doctor's voice lowered. He needs a family member here. Who is his next of kin? Alexandra looked at Molly, hugging her stuffed bear tightly. The little girl raised her hand timidly.
I'm Daddy's family.
The doctor nodded to her, and Alexandra stood still. In that moment, a sharp truth struck her. She wasn't family. But she should have been the first person to protect him, not someone standing in the hallway after everything was already broken. A nurse approached.
Ms. Ashcroft, we've prepared the private room you requested. You may see him.
Briefly, but please don't touch the equipment. Alexandra didn't hesitate. She lifted Molly and stepped into the stark white room where machines beeped steadily. Bernard lay there. No longer the man who had fought an entire boardroom to keep her alive. No longer the gentle father smiling at his daughter. He looked like a burnt-out tree, charred by a forest fire, surviving only on the thinnest sliver of strength. Alexandra stood beside him, her hand trembling as she saw the bruises across his back, marks from the blows he had taken while saving her. She couldn't breathe, couldn't believe it, couldn't forgive the others or herself.
Oh, God. Bernard,
she whispered, her voice cracking.
Why did you have to suffer all this? Just because you saved me?
Molly climbed onto a chair and gently placed her stuffed bear on her father's chest, careful not to hurt him.
Daddy, I brought Mr. Buttons for you, so you won't be scared.
Then she lowered her cheek onto his chest.
Daddy, don't leave me.
Alexandra turned away to wipe her tears, but they fell too fast, streaming down uncontrolled. The doctor spoke softly behind her. Your company's leadership contacted us about managing the media fallout. But we've seen the news spreading online. Alexandra's hands clenched, her voice sharp but trembling. I know. And I'll fix everything. The doctor watched her for a few seconds longer. His life may be saved, but his dignity was destroyed. You understand that, don't you? Alexandra bit her lip until it bled. She looked at Bernard the way someone looks at a question they've avoided their whole life. How can a person stand on top of power, yet allow someone innocent to be buried at the bottom of society? Molly suddenly tugged Alexandra's sleeve.
Miss, you're the one Daddy saved, right?
Alexandra nodded, tears glimmering like glass about to shatter.
Yes, sweetie. He saved me.
Molly stared at her for a long moment, then said something that cut straight into Alexandra's soul.
Then, please don't let them make my daddy sad again.
Alexandra sank to eye level with the girl, placing her hands on Molly's shoulders.
I promise. Right here, in front of you, I promise. Your dad will never be treated like that again.
The door closed softly as the medical team stepped in to continue their work. And under the cold white hospital lights, Alexandra stood beside Bernard, her eyes no longer carrying the panic of someone who nearly died, but the fierce, awakened resolve of a woman ready to fight for the man who returned her life to her. That morning, the 45th floor of Ashcroft Holdings glowed as brightly as ever. But the moment Alexandra stepped into the conference room, the atmosphere dropped as if an invisible hand had squeezed it tight. The people sitting around the table, the CFO, HR, legal, marketing, all looked at her with wary eyes. They were accustomed to seeing Alexandra as cold, sharp, and commanding, but today there was something in her gaze that silenced them instantly. Not anger, not softness, but a blazing truth in the eyes of a woman who had just witnessed a man dying slowly because of their silence. Alexandra stood at the head of the table, but she did not sit in the CEO's chair as she usually did. I want to talk about the man who saved my life, she said, her voice low but ringing like metal. Bernard Kellerman. The crowded boardroom suddenly felt small. Tyler, the CFO, shifted nervously in his seat. Ma'am, the disciplinary procedures have already been... Procedures? Alexandra cut him off, her eyes flaring like a flame held down too long. You fired a man who saved the CEO's life without investigating, without asking, without reviewing footage? You allowed him to be smeared online as some kind of predator, and you call that procedure? No one answered. Alexandra placed a USB drive on the table. The metallic click against the wood echoed sharply. I reviewed the full camera footage from that meeting. 17 minutes. Every second is evidence. She strolled around the table, her gaze scanning each familiar face, the same people who once celebrated her, feared her, bowed to her. I saw myself collapse. I saw you all stand and watch. I saw Bernard run in. I saw him being hit. I saw him being dragged away. I saw you call life-saving CPR inappropriate behavior. Tyler couldn't hold back anymore. He shouldn't have touched you. Alexandra spun, her look slicing through his words like a blade. If he hadn't touched me, I would be dead. The room fell so silent she could hear someone's heart pounding out of rhythm. She continued, voice lower and colder than winter wind. Last night, Bernard was taken to the hospital. He had a 104-degree fever, exhaustion, dehydration, and signs of severe emotional collapse, because this system crushed him. She pointed at the revenue chart on the screen.
We pride ourselves on our profits, yet we couldn't protect the janitor who saved the CEO's life in our own building. An HR director tried to salvage, "Ma'am, the media situation is sensitive. We had to protect the company's image." The company's image? Alexandra let out a small laugh, the kind of smile no one ever wanted to see on her face. Our image wasn't damaged because of Bernard. Our image was damaged because of you, because of your cowardice, because you chose to bury that man to protect your own careers. Everyone lowered their heads. She returned to the head of the table, placing both hands on it, her voice soft but striking like a hammer. "From this moment on, I take responsibility for every mistake you made under my name, and I will correct all of it." Tyler's face drained of color. What are you going to do?" Alexandra stared straight at him. "I'm going to restore Bernard Kellerman's life, honor, and voice, and anyone who stands in the way will no longer have a place in this company." Tyler took a deep breath, pretending to stay calm. "You're doing all this for a janitor, a nobody?" Alexandra stepped right in front of him and lowered her voice. "No. I'm doing this for a good man we treated like trash, a man with more courage than every one of us combined." She turned and walked out of the room, her heels striking the floor like war drums. "The meeting is over." The door closed, and for the first time in their careers, the most powerful people in the company realized they had awakened the fury of a woman who had finally understood the actual value of human life. Alexandra returned to the hospital as the evening settled, her shadow stretching long across the white corridor. She entered the room. Bernard was still lying there, pale, but breathing more steadily than the day before. Molly had fallen asleep beside the bed, hugging her stuffed bear. Alexandra pulled up a chair and sat beside him. She looked at the bruises on his arms, the exhaustion etched into his face, a face she had never once noticed when walking past him in the corporate hallways. "Bernard," she whispered, "I talked to them, and I won't let anyone hurt you again." Her voice trembled, but it carried unshakable resolve. "You saved me. Now it's my turn." She gently held his hand, afraid to hurt him. "Come back again. Not for me, but for your daughter. This world needs people like you, people who do the right thing even when they pay the price." Bernard's hand twitched. His eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. Alexandra froze, not breathing. Molly jerked awake, lifting her head. "Daddy?" Bernard turned his tired eyes toward his daughter, exhaustion softening into a faint, warm glow. "Sweetheart," he exhaled. "Daddy came back." Molly burst into tears and threw herself into his arms, burying her face in his chest. Alexandra turned away, wiping tears, this time tears of relief. Bernard looked up and saw Alexandra standing there, his eyes filled with hesitation, fear, shame, pain, and gratitude all at once. "You came back for me?" he asked, voice raspy. Alexandra nodded, her eyes shimmering. "I came to give back everything you deserve, and to say something I owe you from that day." She stepped closer, meeting his gaze directly, her voice soft but clear. "Thank you. And I'm sorry, Bernard." He closed his eyes and 2 tears slid down his temples, tears of a man who had carried the weight of the world alone, finally being seen. Alexandra placed her hand over his, gripping firmly. From today on, you will never be invisible again.
Outside the window, the last rays of sunlight broke through the thick clouds, spilling into the hospital room like a sign from the sky that sometimes the right thing can be buried, but it cannot stay buried forever. And this is where their story truly begins again. Thank you for staying with this story until this very moment. If it touched you, leave a small like, a heartfelt comment, and share the video to spread kindness. And if you want more healing journeys like this, subscribe to Deep Life Tales, where every story is a gentle reminder that kindness can change a life. See you on the next journey.